Hey, welcome to our video where we're talking about the sweep spline component, or the spline sweeper component I should say. So if we go to settings plugins, just make sure firstly you have your plugin enabled. It's going to be under aperture 9 and it's probably going to be either up here or in the bottom of your page. And you're looking for the spline sweeper component, just make sure this is enabled. Look for that awesomely boring symbol I have. And once you have that, it's very, very easy to use. So I'm going to make a new blueprint class, just make it an actor. Call it spline. Don't worry about the typos. And we're going to add a new spline component. And we're going to compile and save this. I'm going to move that to one side, just drag this in. And I'm just going to grab our spline and we're just going to add a bit of shape to it, just so we have something to look at. Oops, off axis there. Right, so we have a spline and we want to sweep it. Now, if you've done sweeping before using spline mesh components, it's probably a 5 to 10 minute setup if you know what you're doing. If you haven't done it before, then it's more like a 20-minute setup because you've got to have a little look up where it's been done before, on the forums, in the VR template, etc. and figure out how to do it, figure out why they have a magic number for their subdivisions, and then feed that data into the tangents to generate the start and end points and the tangent start and end points. It's a good probably 10 nodes, 15 nodes to set up in Blueprint. And I've come from 3ds Max and I'm so used to it. If you have a spline, I can just tick the visualize box, or I can just hit the sweep component, pick a profile, and it's done. That's what I wanted in Unreal. I wanted like a one-click, two-click solution to be able to see our splines. So that's what we have now with this spline sweeper. So we're going to add a new component and add a sweep component. And then we're going to grab this. We're going to go over to our construction script because this is fine to be used in construction scripts. It doesn't have to be run in game mode. And we're just going to sweep a spline. So that's it. That's the only node that you should ever care about in here. And we're going to grab our spline and we're going to plug it in. And then just for visual demonstration, I'm going to click on our sweep component. These are our attributes. I'll go through them in a second, but let me just increase the start and end size so we can see it a bit clearer. And that's it. We are now sweeping a spline. There it is. So I can take this and I can move these around. These are all live, so I can make new points and everything's going to work. And it took 10 seconds to actually add it. So just to show you the attributes, you can only change the attributes in the default panel. You cannot change them in the instance panel. So if you select the sweep in here, there's no attributes to be seen, nothing you can change. This is to do with a complexity of how Unreal propagates instance data back to the default blueprints. I didn't want to add that because it kind of adds an extra level of complexity. And the point of this plugin is it's meant to be light and reliable, and you just use it and not worry about it, or you don't use it and again you don't worry about it. It's not something you have to worry. You've got it installed and is it going to package correctly, etc. It's meant to be light and reliable. So in the defaults panel, we pick a profile and you have to feed it a profile of some description. It will pick one up by default, which will be the 1 centimeter tube, but you can give it anything you like and it will just stretch it along the spline. You want to give it something with some subdivisions, and you might recognize this one as being very similar to the one they use in the VR template example. In fact, it is the one from the VR template example, basically. It's just a tube mesh, really. And then there's a profile material. This is an override, so it will use whatever on the default mesh if you don't give it one. Otherwise, you can override it here. You can only pick one material. So if you have a mesh that's quite complicated and has more than one material, you'll need to set it directly in the mesh itself, or for loop through the meshes and set them manually. There's a start and end scale, pretty self-explanatory. It just increases the start and end scale of the mesh. There's a sweep axis, and you should recognize these options from the normal sweep spline mesh component. So the sweep axis just sets the forward axis for your mesh. If you're using something like a cube, then it doesn't matter, but any other shape it does. So pick this here. All of mine will be X facing. The spline up direction is defining how it gets around twist problems. So if you find your spline is very twisted, you might want to try a slightly different number in here, like 0, 1, 0. This is just a limitation of how the spline mesh component works. It's nothing directly to do with the plugin. So find something that works for you there. There's a collision profile that we can default to. We just pick no collision. Spline meshes is nothing for us here. That's for the instance panel. And then in the advanced section, there is a subtraction fix. This should nearly always be 1. Very rare occurrences, it might need to be 0 or 2. But this should always be 1 in all the testing I've done. So you should be fine never to change that. So that's it really. Those are all your options. Very simple, very straightforward. In the instance panel over here, if you select the sweep component, you can see we have the spline meshes. And these are there just showing you, we've spawned 6 meshes, or 7, 6 in the array. so 0 to 5 on the array. And if you did want to loop through them, you can get access to them in here as well. So if we search for spline meshes, if I can type, and we'll just get spline meshes. And with this, you can just loop through them and do anything you want. So this will then be just a normal spline mesh component. So you can do any sort of logic you want, like set material. So if you wanted to do, dynamic material instances, then you can create dynamic material instance from here and set it up, in exactly the way you normally would. But we've just done kind of the first pass of the logic for you. So we've set up as a plugin because we're spawning components from within components, and that type of logic has to be done in code. It cannot be done in Blueprint in a traditional way. The other reason it's a plugin, more importantly for me, was I just wanted access to it in every project I work in, because it's meant to be a quality of life improvement. So I don't have to manually merge into everything. I just want it available as if it was a native Unreal feature. It's a good, it's an easy component to work with. It's very simple. So I just wanted access to it all the time, and that's why it's a plugin. And I've even gone further and I've enabled it as a default plugin in my engine config settings. So I just have it in all projects. So it's very useful just to have an extra component there. So that's it really. It's just hopefully meant to help you out. It's meant to just speed up your workflow. Like everything on the marketplace, it can be done by hand, but this is just there to make things quicker. I'd still say if you wanted to do really complicated logic with your spline mesh component, like you're doing really clever runtime things with it, using its collision and hitboxes and things like that, perhaps you might want to go with a traditional method and just set it up all manually. This is meant to be, you've got a spline, you want to sweep it, you've got a component for it, done. Easy as that. And you still have access to all the spline mesh components in the array, so you can add complicated logic to them if you want to. So that's it. Hopefully you find the plugin useful. Please feel free to leave a rating and a comment if it's useful. And if you have any problems or want advice, join the Discord, which you should find linked somewhere or another. Thanks for watching and enjoy.